Hi there, I'm very excited to welcome you to our seventh podcast episode of today's Top Tech Leaders. The goal of this podcast is to share insights and knowledge of top CTOs and CPOs on their leadership and what they've learned throughout their journey. As always, we'll cover management tips and tricks, organizational structures, tools, and best practices on how to successfully lead your product team. Our goal is to bring valuable insights to product people of all seniorities. I myself am Marc Clemens, the founder and CEO of CodeControl and 9am, and for today's podcast, it's a pleasure to welcome Rhiannon White. Rhiannon is a CPO at a fantastic Clue app and has over 10 years of experience in product, as well as previously in marketing. I'm sure she will tell us a bit more about that later. She has worked for companies like Sky, Shazam, the BBC, and successful startups like Vent in New Zealand. I'm very excited to have you here today with us. Welcome, Rhiannon. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Marc. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Cool. So perhaps to get started, you could tell the listeners a bit about yourself, where you're from, how did you end up in product?
Yeah, that's a great question because very few people come to product directly, right? We all have a path to get here. So as you so kindly said, I'm Rhiannon. The funny accent that your listeners can hear is because I'm from New Zealand originally. We're a small country at the bottom of the globe. Actually, I was looking at a presentation internally that someone was doing the other day, and they're an Australian colleague, and they'd left New Zealand off the map. So I was a bit outraged. But from New Zealand, and part of being a Kiwi is that we're very far away, so we like to travel and we like to do a lot of different things. So my journey to product was a very wandering journey, I guess. I spent the first half of my career mostly in marketing, and that also had been a bit of a wandering and adventure. Lots of serendipity in terms of ending up in marketing. But I really loved marketing because I really love I'm really obsessed with users and the people who use our products and how we can be useful to people. And so the thing I loved about marketing was understanding what appeals to people. I loved the insight and the strategy, and I loved knowing if we had an impact. I wasn't too fussed about the bit in the middle campaigns because I found that it was just too one directional, right? I found the more and more I got into marketing, the more and more I got into the research and the insights, and then trying to understand whether or not we had an impact. I really felt like it was all loops. It wasn't one way. And then the closer I got to working on digital products. So I guess I ended my marketing career working on iPlayer at the BBC in London. iPlayer is a bit like Netflix for the BBC. It's a beautiful product. And I really realized that the relationship that our users had with the product, and they did have a relationship with the product, was driven by the product, not really by what I was doing in marketing. And so I really wanted to be close to that relationship because I wanted that ongoing relationship with the users. I didn't want to just send them something and then be done and walk away. I wanted to have a dialogue, really. And that, I think, is what product is at the end of the day. There's a lot of stuff. There's all sorts of other stuff around it. But at the end of the day, it's about a dialogue with your users, trying to create something that's valuable, learning from them, changing, learning. And a good conversation goes like that, right? It goes back and forth. You learn from each other and you progress together. And so that was how I realized I wanted to move into product. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity because my colleague at the time, who's an amazing product leader, this guy called Daniel Danker, he's just one of the best product leaders in the world. He very kindly, spotted this desire in me and gave me the chance to join him in his product team that he was building at Shazam. And so that's how we made it.
Again.
Serendipity and luck, and like many people, I think many of us transition into product because we form a trusted relationship with folks inside a company, and we're able to deliver for them, and then they see that maybe we can deliver in another area as well. I won't lie, my first year in product was really hard. I talk about this quite openly because I think it's really important that people understand. I think a lot of people find product very difficult when they start, or actually a lot of the time, and they can feel like it's them and it's a bit lonely. I know I felt like it was me, and it's because I wasn't good enough and I wasn't this, insert something here, I wasn't enough. And the first 13 months I was, I worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. On Sundays I would sort of collapse and watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer with my husband and then do it all over again. 6 days. And it really felt very I wasn't a good product manager, and I knew that, and I wanted to be a good product manager. It was so overwhelming, and there was so much that to try and deal with, and there's so many expectations on product managers, and product as a discipline is so vast, and I was really
Mm.
struggling to find where could I add value, and so that process took a while, right? So it took me a while to fall in love with product, but once I got there, I've never looked back in terms of the falling in love. It was really, if marketing was a kind of a gradual falling out of love with it, and I have come to realize actually that marketing is very powerful and you have to come back to it. But product has been a kind of a non-stop love affair since I got
Mm.
over this rocky beginning.
Really, really interesting. Yeah, I think it's the journey into product is especially interesting, right? Because you come from this marketing background. A lot of people have the background from UX or UI design, or um, I don't know. There's so many different stories, right? And then most people you can't really learn it by the book. No, you have to experience it, and there's certain methodologies, but then you have to do it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's no surprise to listeners that we want to talk about product marketing and product monetization today. How shall we start? I think for me, one of the most interesting parts is how you structure your product team, because there's so many different ways people do it. You started at Clue fairly recently, I think a year ago.
Mm.
So did you restructure it? Is there something where you say, well, there needs to be a certain structure in a product team that works?
Well, that's actually a very interesting question. I mean, so I started at Clue, yeah, 14 months ago, I think, and we did change the composition of the product teams a little bit, but really, uh, yeah, I think this is an interesting question because there's two strands to this. One is the structure of product teams, so product development teams, which are multidisciplinary and have engineering and product management and product design and sometimes other things in them, and then the product management, I guess, small P&M team. And for me, it's incredibly important that anything to do with product management or product development, sorry, the product development teams, that must always be done hand in hand and lockstep with my partner who uh, runs engineering. So here I work with this amazing CTO, Greg Reisoff. He is honestly one of the greatest CTOs I've ever come across. And he and I, from the beginning, sat down and talked about how we wanted to structure the teams and how we want, what competencies did we want to have them to have, what principles were we aligned on, and that's always been the same in my previous roles as well, right? Like, so questions of structure of the product development organization are not, I don't see them as being for me alone. They are absolutely for us as a team, and this kind of joined at the hip thing is probably one of the most important, the things I hold to the most dearly. That Greg and I, we are partners in crime in everything we do, and that is the first thing, the first most important thing. And then in terms of
Mhm.
how the product management team is structured, that is really kind of in service of how we're going to set up our product development teams. And so for us here, it's a pretty classic setup, um, which I have found worked in this scale and size before. So we have cross-functional teams that have, as I mentioned, engineering, product management, product design in the team. The teams are because we're an app and we we do have native developers. We have native apps for iOS and Android. So each team has iOS, Android backend engineering, has an engineering team lead, a product manager, and a product designer, and they are all dedicated to the team. Their reporting lines are through their disciplines because I think your reporting line should be through your discipline, but their working togetherness is in those teams, and that's really important.
Interesting. And how does it work? I mean, in the end, there's always a kind of a conflict between at least product and when it comes to commercials, right? You want to ship as much as possible and I don't know, and be fast and have a lot of new things, and there's development that usually doesn't ship fast enough. And I don't know, but you work hand in hand, but at the same time, there's this conflict. Or
Yeah,
how
I
do you
think
see it?
it's a really interesting point. The building software is fundamentally a creative endeavor, and all creative endeavors involve tension. Like the creative process is a it's a difficult, crazy process, right? You're creating something out that wasn't there before. And so there's always tension involved, 100%. The idea, I think, is that the discipline should support and help each other while also providing that tension to pull along, right? So obviously, one discipline might want to do something one way, another discipline's going to add some context around, well, maybe we don't need it to be that way to start with. Maybe we can accept compromises as we go through. I think the critical thing is that everybody has to have the same context, and they have to have the same context about users and about the business. And these are the two pieces of context that's so important, right? So the user insight around what are the problems that we are solving for our users and why do they matter to them. Everybody must have that insight. And then the business insight, so this point about monetization and conflict. If everybody has the same business insight, then I don't think it needs to be in conflict. Then I think the people can see the connection. So for us, and for me, I think we openly talk in our, we have a all hands once a month that we call the home meeting, and we share a simplified version of the P&L. And at first we didn't call it that because people get a bit freaked out about the P&L. Oh, I don't know what a P&L is, profit and loss statement. What does that mean? I'm not an accountant. I'm not an accountant for sure, but I love the P&L. And our head of finance, who shares the P&L, does a great job and did a great job of making it seem like it wasn't the P&L for a while. But now I say to the team, the wider team, like, this is the P&L. You all see this. You all know it now. You all understand, right? Because actually, I think it's really important that everybody understands the context. They understand the costs. What does it cost to run this business? And they understand the revenues, what's coming in and what's not coming in and why. And so, we have a really strong practice around making sure, and one can never get this right, but trying to make sure that the commercial data is just as available as the user data and is available. So for example, we have a meeting on Mondays that anyone can join, where we go through all of the sales data for the previous week and we look at all the key metrics in there. And I really want the engineering people to be there just as much, and the designers to be there just as much as product managers, because when people understand the context, because at the end of the day, our fundamental belief is that we will create value as a business if we create value for users, right? If we solve their problems, then we will create value as a business and be sustainable and be able to bring and deliver on our mission for the long term. And so to do that, you need to understand users, but you need to understand their problems. You need to understand what they're willing to pay for and why, and then what that looks like in terms of the economics of the business. So if you have that shared data as the context or the ground in which everyone operates, then I think the conflict is much easier to manage, because it's not, you don't have that feeling like, why are you saying that? That's crazy. Like, do you not care about users? Oh, no, you do care about users. This is why. Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of like an alignment topic, but alignment in the end, saying, well, we got to make cash. So, and if we want to do this, we need to prioritize these things.
Yeah, and it's also very, but you're right. I think sometimes there is a bit of a weird thing in product about people not wanting to talk about money or talk about, and we talk a lot about product market fit, but what is product market fit other than somebody's willing to give you some of their hard-earned cash, right? Like, let's all be really honest, the world economy is tough and people are, inflation is high, people have bills, they have lives everybody has stuff going on. And if we can deliver something that is valuable enough that they're willing to part with some of what they earned, then that means we've delivered product market fit for that person, and so I'm proud. I mean, for me, I feel like this should be a point of pride if we have developed something that someone is willing to pay for. That is nothing to me. I mean, to me, that is the thing to really, that's
and I think it's really interesting with Clue, especially, like, if I remember right, you have more than 10 million users. So, and you still probably have the two things, the freemium and then the paid. So you create value. People love the product, and I think everyone I know that uses it loves the product. But then the question is, how do I create so much product that people are willing to pay, right?
Exactly. And you can only get to that understanding through a lot of deep work with your users, actually. So, and this is where my quite obsessive passion for user research comes in, and for just spending a lot of time with users. So we are very blessed at Glue we have just over 10 million monthly active users, which is great. So we have a ton of data. We have so much behavioral data off the product. That's wonderful. And it tells us what people are doing, but it doesn't tell us why they're doing it, or what problem they're trying to solve, or what problem they're failing to solve with our product. And then once they leave our product, we don't have any of their data, right? So we spend an enormous amount of time speaking directly with our users as well, right? So this is a really important discipline in the team, and the idea is that we should all be speaking to users every week. Now, again, nothing is perfect, so I'm not going to pretend that everybody manages that every week, but we all try to. I speak to users every week. Everybody in the team, as much as possible, speaks to users every week, and the idea there is not so much that. Yes, we have specific things to test, and we do a lot of testing on specific pieces of work, but we also do these long form, long discovery. We spent months and months and months speaking to churned subscribers and churned users to understand why, to try and get into this. What is the mental model that people have around willingness to pay? What are they willing to pay for, and when, and why? What are they not willing to pay for? And what does that balance need to look like for us? And it's actually super clear for us when you spend a lot of time with users, that there is a very clear mental model that people have using our product and actually using all these types of products. And so that gives us the framing to help make those prioritization choices, right? Because then we understand, okay, is this something that fits what we know people are willing to pay for? Great. Is it not? But is it going to help build the funnel? Then also great. It helps you hone in on what is the value from what you're trying to build.
So what is that mental model that people have?
Yeah, sure. So the mental model around a cycle tracker is very strongly. So for users, there is a strong expectation that broad and shallow set of functionality should be free, and they expect that to be free. But when a user wants to go deep and personalized, then they're willing to pay, and they're highly willing to pay. And there's an additional. There's sort of three dimensions to think about that. So the broad and shallow is dimension one versus personalized and deep. Dimension two is life stage. So people go through, the thing with the reproductive health is that, yes, it is linear. There's a point where people start menstruating, and then there's a point where they stop. But actually, A, that's an extraordinarily long time. It's 35, 40 years. And B, people go through an enormous amount of different stages and cycles within that, right? So it's not purely linear. And so when folks arrive at a stage where they wish to go deep and have a more personalized experience, maybe they're trying to conceive, maybe they are pregnant, maybe they've just had a baby, maybe they're entering perimenopause, which is crazy, right? People have to learn all the things all over again. So then they have high willingness to pay and high need, because they need more. They don't just need to track and know when their next date is. They need more. And so, of course, it's valuable then what we can offer. And then the other dimension is when things change. So the menstrual cycle is fascinating, because it's doctors refer to it as the fifth vital sign. It is an incredibly So hormones regulate so much in our systems, and the menstrual cycle is the fulcrum around which that hormone, for those of us with this biology, that turns. And so when and people who have cycles know that, right? They know that monitoring and understanding their cycle is a good barometer for their health. And so when things change, then users need to go deep and do a lot of tracking, a lot of understanding. And by having that data, then they're able to really take charge of their health. And that's the most important thing. And people are willing to pay it that much, because it's very directly applicable to what's going on for them. So, we think about it as like these steady state trackers. Your steady state, everything's pretty much fine. You just really need to put your data in and get your prediction out, right? That's fine. Those folks, that's where the freemium product is great for them. We are thrilled to have them there, because we want to be helpful and want to be there to support them. And then we think that gives us the right to, if they trust us and they're enjoying that experience, that gives us the right to, when something changes and they're no longer in a steady state, that then we have the right to say, hey, we have some things that can help. Would you like that? And usually they do want that.
Very interesting. So I'm not a Clue user, but I'm an Aura Ring user. Yeah. And I think when people ask me, because I used the Apple Watch before, now I'm having the Aura Ring, and when people ask me what is better and do you like, I'm like, well, it's a worse fitness tracker, but it's a really great health tracker because it contextualizes so much. It gives me so much insights that help me to understand what to do, and that is what actually keeps me hooked. And after a year, they put in subscription $5.99 per month, and I paid, even though it almost pisses me off that I pay suddenly a subscription, right? Because I paid the product already, which is different if you just have an app. But I think the contextualization, the personalization has a big impact. Very interesting. And how do you identify when to start monetization? I think most software starts premium. Okay.
And I think that's the great. I mean, I'm a newcomer to Clue, and actually Shazam was the same when I joined Shazam. They both Clue and Shazam started at times when the question was not really what is the monetization model. The question was, is this thing even going to work? It's disruptive innovation. Is this going to be useful in the world? Which is great and an amazing question to answer. And I really think it's very important to be able to answer that question right from the beginning around the model and willingness to pay, because your revenue strategy and your product strategy necessarily are the same thing. To this whole point that I was saying about, product market fit. If someone's willing to pay, that's the ultimate test of product market fit. And so if you don't think about that from the beginning, you set yourself up to have conflicting revenue and product strategies, right? Because then your users might have come to you for something that. So, I mean, I guess a very classic example is that, at Shazam, we tried to build an advertising business, and actually we've built a very successful advertising business. But you need three things to build an advertising business, right? You need reach, which we had. You need data, some of which we had, and you need time spent, which we did not have. If you think about the use case for Shazam, actually, it's like the antithesis of time spent. Yeah. And so, and we did other stuff brilliantly. It was, in terms of discovery and the funnel for music, amazing. So we were able to build a very successful and strong advertising business because of the other two, but it was never going to be the main engine because of this point around actually time spent was orthogonal to what users wanted and needed. And so if you don't think about that from the very beginning, then you run into a bunch of trouble, I think, in terms of what is the market. When I worked for a bank for a while in New Zealand, which was super interesting. And the thing about banking is that there's tons of margin in banking, but the point of, so margin accrues to the point of control, right? Like, which is a lot of fancy words, but it's a really important concept to think about when you're thinking about the monetization thing. Margin accrues to the point of control. So what is your point of control that is valuable to people? And in banking, of course, that's they only do two things, right? Banking provides access to capital, and it provides the ability to move your money around. There's no margin in moving your money around. Nobody cares about that anymore. It's not a point of control. But access to capital, huge amounts of margin. You don't need software. I mean, obviously it all uses software, but software is not the value creation. Have capital is the value creation. And so I came to realize at the bank very quickly that while it was a wonderful experience to build software for people around to help manage their finance, because if you love what people, it's the old joke around when I was a child, we were always taught never to talk about money, sex, or politics, and with Clue, I get to talk about money and sex with
Successfully done.
But it's super interesting, right? Like, if you think about how personal money is in our lives, if you're really interested in the emotional role that products fill in people's lives, being able to talk to them about how they manage their money, it was such a privilege, and I loved that. But at the end of the day, software was not the value creation center for the bank, and it's not. Maybe N26 is an exception, but generally for banks. And so, because we weren't there, we weren't ever going to. It was not like being in a software company like here, where that is the point of value creation. And so you've got to think about monetization. What is the point of control that margin will accrue to from the very beginning? Because that is what flows all the way through to your prioritization, to your product market fit, and to fundamentally whether or not you're satisfying your users' needs.
And does that mean you need to monetize from the beginning, or it just means that you need to always understand how to monetize and talk to your users in a way that you understand what is what?
Oh, the latter for sure. I think I don't think you have to monetize from the beginning, but you need to be thinking about it and framing and working with users and working with them when you're testing and learning and understanding with the clear framework of the model of how you're going to monetize. I mean, the great pricing experts of this world would argue that you should do it right from the beginning, and I would imagine they are right. That's not always easy for folks. I think, though, if you've got to start with the end in mind, in the sense of you've got to really understand what is the model going to look like, and will your business model support your user need model, right? Like, that you've understood the problem that you're solving. Do they align?
Okay. So, based on the model, it could be that you say, well, I need to grow users that are easier to grow in freemium for a certain service and then convert them into paid, but you need to lay out how the paid works and how to get them into paid and why.
Yeah.
Super interesting. One more thing. I think this is a bit with this paid, because we touched in the beginning briefly, but what role does marketing play in this whole product thing?
Very important role, which slightly, I have to eat humble pie to say that, having left marketing and decided I want to do this other thing, I have been on this journey over the last 10 years of realizing, of kind of coming full circle in terms of realizing again just how important marketing is. And why? Because fundamentally, innovation without adoption is meaningless. And that is the work doesn't speak for itself. You have to speak for it. And I think it goes back to actually for a lot, 5 million years ago in my marketing career, I actually worked for several years in doing political marketing. And, the thing that I always used to talk to the teams about is, we spend a lot of time understanding voters and what was going on for them. And inside the political world, everybody thinks the lead story is the most important thing in the world, but in the real people's world, it's not. And so most of my job was really trying to make the wider team understand that the average person voting or not voting has, 5 million things that they need to think about in a day. And we're just like one tiny thing. And this is the same for products, right? I mean, I think and live and breathe our product every day. I'm in there 5 million times a day looking at the product, playing with it, finding bugs, but most people aren't. Most people need to, if you think about the average Clue user, they're getting up in the morning, they're trying to exercise, they're trying to get ready for work, maybe they're wrangling some kids, maybe they're caring for older family, then they have to get to work. That's before they even get there. Then they have to get to work, they deal with work, they have to deal with errands and everything that's keeping the household going and keeping their lives going. They have to get home afterwards, then they've probably got a whole bunch of, they've got to get dinner on the table, do the dishes. If they're lucky, they'll collapse at the end of the day with maybe a glass of wine or, a video game or something on the couch, and they might have half an hour to themselves. Tracking is something that it's got to happen fast. It's got to be in the context of what they're doing, and they don't have time to find that we've changed something in the product, right? And so this is where marketing becomes really important, because you've got to understand that people don't have a lot of time, and you need to make it easy for them to understand what you're offering and make it easy for them to get to what you're offering. And so that's in the product as well, but also in the communication to them and letting them know. And we can really see, we have a beautiful example of this recently, actually, where one of our product development teams was working on an improvement to the core tracking experience. They did this beautiful job. They really dug into what the problems were for users. They really tested it. They shipped a really fast, kind of slim iteration to try and solve the problem, but not overinvest lots of time. They really did solve the problem. And then we brought in the CRM, and you can see in the graphs, you can see when they ship it to new users, you can see this little tick up. It's great. And then it's all solid, it's stable, because we have a really brilliant engineering team around so then we roll out to 100%, you see it tick up again. And then we bring in the CRM campaigns to let people know, hey, we've made this change. It'll make the job that you're trying to do easier. You might want to try it. And then you see them rise again, right? And now that functionality is being used by tens and tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of people every day, and it's just growing more and more. You've got to tell people about it, right? It's really important to let them know. You can't expect people just to find something on their own. That's not fair. And I think this is for me, marketing that I'm really passionate about and I love is not about some of my previous experience, which sometimes I felt, like pushing that one way, pushing a message out. It's about understanding it's the same as product. Is there a problem to solve? How do we solve it for you? How do we let you know that we've solved the problem? So if the market is in service of helping the user do the job that they're trying to do, then I think it's useful and it's really successful, and then I'm all for it.
So that means marketing are the spokespeople for product. They communicate what product does, and they communicate back to a certain way as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, they have to. Yeah.
Does that mean they should report to product?
Oh, I'm agnostic about where they report. I don't have a strong view. I mean, here we have two components. So we have a CRM and a kind of UA ASO component to our growth marketing team, and they report to me. But then we also have some brand communications, very small, I would say a couple of people, and they report to one of my colleagues who is a very specialist, amazing operator in that area. I'm not massively tired about where they report. What I do think really matters is the shared context and the shared data and the shared insight.
Okay.
So, for example, one of the things that we do to scale insight is, I mentioned that we all want to be interviewing, but one product person or one designer or one engineer or interviewing one user is no good to me. What is useful, and this is the whole point about, it's brilliant about There's plenty that's very bad about humans as a species, but one of the things that's quite amazing is how we're able to scale knowledge. And so, we have a practice around people do the interview and then you transcribe. Well, we have someone who helps us transcribe the interview. And so then we share that and we share the summaries. But the point is that the users' unadulterated words are available to everybody in the company, anonymized, of course. We're very, very careful and safe about all the data.
Especially in Germany, yes.
Yeah. Very important. Very important. Especially with our product, we are all users. My own data is in this product, right? My own health and my own, all the stuff I track a lot. Like we all take it very seriously. We can't exist without it. We don't think so anyway. But with the transcripts is that then anyone can read them, because I have this real strong belief that it's really important to have summaries and have people bring their insights out. That's great. It's also really important to hear directly the direct words that users use, and those are always the best. That's always where the best insight or the best phrase or the best wording comes from, is directly from the people who use your product, right? And so when we go through the transcripts, we tag each other. This is how we share and spread it out, and we have a practice of that now. And so we also, it's not just that product managers tag product managers tag engineering leads, they take designers, and they take the people in the marketing team or the marketing functions. Like, hey, look at how they're talking about how they found it. Have you got this? Or hey, look at how they. And actually, recently we did this again with that particular functionality I mentioned that makes some of our core thing easier. We called it one thing, but we found in the transcripts and when we're working with users afterwards that they were calling it something else. So we've called it what they call it, because clearly that's what we should do. Right? That's how they understand it. And so that, and the CRM team picked up on that, and they're like, hey, look at this. It's like, yes, we should totally rename it. That's what it should be, because that's how users perceive it, as understanding their solving their problem. So that's how I think this cycle works.
Super cool. I could have endless more questions, and I would love to dig deeper into the whole interviewing and everything. But I think for today, we have to call it a day. It's been really great talking with you about politics, sex, and money. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. Perhaps as a last question, is there any book, resource, webinar, or the like that you would recommend to our listeners?
I would. There are probably a couple that I really love. There is actually a strategy paper from 35 years ago maybe nearly 40 years ago, that I'll send you the link to, that I always recommend product people read, because strategy is a really important process, and it's but actually is a way of thinking as well. And I think it's really important that people understand how they think and as an individual in that space. It's called it's about emergent versus deliberate strategy, and so I think it's really important that people understand as a company and as individuals where their preferences are. Obviously, Marty Kagan's books are really brilliant, and I consider, obviously the source. When I mentioned I was a very unhappy and bad product manager, and I remember reading his book and crying, because thinking, well, I'm not that, I can't do that. And I don't think very many individual humans can do that, but I think a product team, even a small product team, can cover that breadth. And so understanding and thinking about it in that way is really valuable. And then I also, it's going to sound a bit cheesy, but the thing that I would recommend that everybody read some of your own users' direct words. Like, that's the thing that you can, to your point around, you can read the methodologies, you can read the stuff, but if you read consistently what your users, whatever word you use, your customers, your users, your audience, your voters, whoever, like if you read over and over and over again their direct words, then you start to really build. There's a lot of talk in product about product sense. What is product sense? Product sense is just pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is just at the scale, right? It's just having seen enough data. And the thing that founders do so brilliantly is they really internalize the problem, and they really understand the problem that they're solving. And product managers can do that if they spend enough time really deeply immersed in what their users, customers, whatever word it is, say, think, feel, do. And that's, I think, people will always get value from reading a piece about strategy or reading Marty Kagan, but they'll get the most value day in, day out from reading their own users' words.
Fantastic. Fantastic words for the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Rhiannon, for sharing your expertise today. Really, really insightful. Well, in case you want to reach out to Rhiannon, I'm sure you can find her on LinkedIn. If you have any other questions or ideas for our podcast, please reach out to us. And if you liked it, then please subscribe to the channel and make sure to leave some feedback for us. So until next time, keep coding, keep leading.
Thank you, Marc. Bye.